my generation, I'm older than you? Yeah.
The same age.
Same age, okay, we're 53 years young, and you were never told about producers, for example, with films. You know, they were kind of invisible characters. So my sort of career, and that's a lie, I've literally gone from one thing to the next. So in my time, I've worked with MTV, creating, it just shows you how old I am, teletext pages. Yeah, there you are. Been involved in television and film, but even though I'm a Welsh speaker, the first work we did was content through the medium of English. There's a big reason for that, and that links all the way back to the end of my short talk. Worked for Radio 2, and then had, at the age of 23, employing 18 people in Aberystwyth. We were publishing magazines. Two of the publications, no public money, and that was really important. It was all done on advertising. That's changed. Then it was headhunted, which was a wonderful experience, to the chief exec of the media agency for Wales, which became known as Screen, and then with the WDA and various other organisations, we disappeared. And then I was left with this pot of redundancy money. And because I was the chief executive, this has been filmed, isn't it? Okay. Richie, if anybody wants to talk to me afterwards, so this is kind of serious, so whatever, there are things I can say, and there are things that I'd want to say privately, which I think might be useful. And there are things, obviously, because it's been filmed, so I will...
Just let me know when to stop recording, I'll just...
No, I've been there before. I remember the Western Mail coming to the office in Cardiff for Screen, and they came last week and said, can we have a photo for the Western Mail? I said, yeah, whatever. And there was a trainee assistant with a photographer, and I was wearing shorts, because I didn't expect to meet anybody. And the guy said, can you do up? He said, yeah. Anyway, my picture appeared in baggy shorts with my legs up on the window, and the board were not impressed because Peter Stead at some point thought he could see more than they were really meant to see. That fucking picture came back to haunt me. So no, I'm not doing that. No, but seriously, if anybody wants to, I'm serious. And if you ask to see me before the end of January, ask Richie and I'll come and do an hour or whatever. But if you think there's absolutely no point, obviously don't ask for the meeting, because it'll be a waste of my time and your time. So, with my redundancy, I invested everything in a company called the Festivals Company, and I'll go through that in a minute, but one of our projects was the Iris Prize. Now, we've just celebrated the 13th Iris Prize, so, okay, this is a different one. Who's not been to Iris? Hands up. Okay, why? No, I'm teasing you. Iris is a niche. It's a niche within a niche within a niche, which obviously Dylan mentioned it. So, short films. You know, I still come across people who have no idea what a short film is. They think the film's going to be long. It's gay, or LGBT plus. We added the plus because we kept adding letters, and I thought, no. Needing new logos all the time. And I said, no, give it a plus. But anyway, it is what it is. It's the world's largest LGBT short film prize. Somebody gets £30,000 cash to make another short film. We've produced 11, so we're in post-production right at the end. We have picture lock and everything. And we're in pre-production on the 12th film. So what I've got here is, as the title suggests, a run through Iris 2019. So I think that out. So, I'm not going to talk about Iris, but I will talk about Iris at the end, and how we got there. So, Richie asked me to do's and don'ts. So, the list of don'ts is a long one, and the list of do's is a long one. So, what I tried to do this morning is a little bit of prep. What I have done is they're really general, and I thought, is there any point in doing them really? But then nobody told me this, and I think I would have saved a lot of time if I'd have been in this position. So the do's and don'ts, and then the first one is time. And it's a really obvious one. It's take time. Does anybody know what I mean by that? Because there is a sense of urgency always, isn't there? Just to do it now. Now. Deliver now. And then you know sometimes you can't deliver now. I'll be able to deliver maybe in 2 years' time. So time is really, because everything around us, whether it's social media, access to news. I remember in Aberystwyth, there was a president of America that was come over. And I think he coughed or something at lunchtime, and he was rushed to hospital. Anyway, by the time I got home and it was the 6 o'clock news, he was fine. And he wasn't even on the news. You know what I'm saying? Today, flipping Nora, there'd be a flash, he's been rushed to hospital. And I don't think I'm less, better informed today than I was back 25 years or whatever. So take time, everything else is telling you. Because with growth and all the other things, I love your sofa, for example, the posh sofa. But, when do you need, so I'm assuming you could afford the sofa at the time, but you can do, so take time, and that's with everything. The others, okay. Number 2, you don't have to, I can email these to you, Richie?
Yes.
Or maybe not. And again, Dylan referred to this, a clear vision. And it's amazing how many people, they're just, the vision just isn't there. And it's really difficult understanding what they're talking about. They're passionate, some of them are crying. I've got no idea why they're crying. And they get really emotional, especially if it's businesses to do with campaigning, whether it's politics or creating political broadcasts. We've done that as well in another life. It's having a clear vision, and I'll give you an example of a vision and why. Richie's already alluded to the Welsh Curry House. So before I mention Currys briefly, so when I created the Festivals Company, which was on necessity because Screen disappeared, we decided to sort of develop 6 projects, and that was a deliberate decision, and they were quite different, but they were kind of in the entertainment sector really, or leisure, and one of them was the Curry Awards. And I remember I was up in Scotland, and it was after devolution, and there was a group of Bangladeshi businessmen, and they just didn't get devolution. They just felt that they'd only just got used to being Scottish, as it were, or British, and then they were being asked to do something else. And so I came back, and I thought, because obviously you could sell that's onion bhaji's, and they said it's pizza, because there is pizza later. Have they arrived yet, by the way? Okay, I'll talk for a long time. And the same thing was happening in Wales. Now, it's not a big secret, but I'm a Nashi as well, but I'm not one of those scary nationalists. All I want is to be treated equal. I just want a chair around the table, that's all I want. So I don't think it's too much to ask. So I never thought devolution was going to happen, but I wanted it to be inclusive, because you know, as you saw with Iris there, we didn't have to create every other diversity, because after 13 years it's just there. I'll explain maybe about that in a minute as well. And it became obvious, you know, and that the Bangladeshi community, because Indian restaurants are not actually run by Indians. It's about 90+% of Bangladeshi, and it's a specific place in Bangladesh. And yes, they did not feel part of Wales. They felt that there was a distance between them. So, as you do in business, you go to your friends, and David Earl, presiding officer, he likes his curry as well. And that's how the Welsh Curry House was created. There was a mechanism, in my little head anyway, it was a niche to make sure that the Bangladeshi community, and you're talking about 400 individual businesses really when you're talking about the takeaways and all of that. And then the rest of it was to do with healthy living. Because, you know, how many of you are very disappointed if your curry dish isn't some vibrant colour, which they just chucked in, you know? Well, luckily, we're not seeing as much of that. And how many of you remember having to split the oil where it was floating on the top, especially with a takeaway? Now, that's not happening as much. Now, I think there is an issue with Welsh lamb, because that was another thing we sort of fitted in, was to try and get using more local produce. Now, I think that will happen, but we were ahead of the game. So the vision was really simple. It wasn't, let's have a jolly to do with curries, you know, and then the rest of it was just the business. We managed to get ITV to follow, so we had 3 half-hour programmes following the first, we had regional judges, and then, you know, Richie said he was really pleased to be a regional judge. That's good. But from a business point of view, you were actually developing the links. So the whole thing, you know, grew from being very clear about what you were doing, and also a niche. And this goes way, you know, 30 years, 20 years later, when it came to Iris and all of that. So yeah, a clear vision. And also the other one that people keep asking, which I think is a really good one, is to ask yourself, if I wasn't doing this, would anybody notice? Because in the end, I gave up on the curry. I did it for 10 years, and it was, I have said this on record, it is a sector which is intrinsically selfish, and no, they weren't giving anything back. So I handed that over, but you know, it took me 10 years to, because it worked, because you were able to get Sharon Lloyd to do things for you, getting all these other people, and then because we had other, so I'm going to come up to my, it's another thing about diversification, that you can go in different ways. So these things complement each other, you know, the different kind of ideas of different businesses. That sounds a bit complicated, but that's what we did with the Festivals Company. And right at the beginning as well with Premier Cymru Wales, yeah, that's what it was called. And that included a portfolio of different things. Because as you said, you know, you never really, well, you plan that you know where the work's coming from. But until you have the critical mass and you've got a sales team, etc., you know, so all these things. So diversification of your portfolio. The one, number 3, and the one that I was up until the last 10 years really, because I don't count the 10 years with Screen, the media agency for ourselves, public sector. There was shed loads of money coming in from different places. So that doesn't, you know, doesn't count. But in the private sector, is cash an investment in the companies having the capital behind you. I think it's a huge problem. And I did allude to my redundancy, you know, which basically meant there was 40k on the table. And I was able to, but I'll come back to that. But it's something I'm constantly hearing. I don't know if they're like, you know, obviously there are some projects that you can go to the marketplace and they give you. So I've always found that fascinating. You know, you talk about micro and macro and small companies, and So I'm not quite sure whether Wales in some way has learnt from that, or whether it's just a natural thing, or whether it's a weakness in me. And I deliberately mention a weakness in me or something that's lacking in me on the basis that I'm always learning, you know, I'm always finding something new. And I've been taking, you know, just, you know, information that Dylan shared, you know, they're on my phone, so I can share them with the team, and just, so you're always, you know, knowledge, information, blah, blah, blah. But the cash thing, and it is difficult, I think it's still difficult, so I think trying to balance up the positives, because I tend to be, you know, well, I don't know what a half-empty glass is, because it's never half-empty, it's always full, because I don't drink. Oh, that was a really shit joke. And nobody laughed. Okay, I'm not doing that one again. Oh, thank you. That is sympathy laughs, really. Yeah, capital. So, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a lot of money, because it depends on what you're doing, obviously. So, you know, I don't know how much capital you needed initially.
Not much.
Not much, yeah.
Yeah.
And similarly with the stuff that I've done, you know, not really. The biggest is obviously is when you do need 2 extra members of staff, and it's the wages bill that has always scared me, because they will come before anybody else. Okay, wages. This is seamless. And next, it's the team around you. Flipping all right. I did think about this. I don't know how many of you are quite defensive as people. You know, how many of you are happy when somebody comes up to you and says, that wasn't very good, was it? Do you know what I mean? And at the end of Iris, I'm telling you, we had 10,000 for 300 admissions, 6 days. And I had a shit Iris this year, to be honest with you, because right at the beginning of Iris, somebody told me we'd lost £30,000. Oh, yeah, do you know when I saw you and I was, anyway, I thought I masked it really well. But I had a, and it was all to do with, we haven't lost the money, we almost did. So luckily the fact that this person said on opening night, I actually wanted to kill this person at the time. That was a joke. You might want to cut that one out just in case. Because you could get involved in an accident and they might think it wasn't me. But anyway, but what was interesting was I was kind of angry because I don't, you know, I've learned lessons. So you start thinking, oh, that's an interesting comment, yes. Oh yeah, I'll take that on board. But generally when people say negative things to you, you kind of, so the one thing that I've always done, and I was lucky, again, I'm not sure if it's a generational thing, but when I've always had people around me who were either older than me, and what that means is they knew, well, theoretically, they should know more things, and they're more willing to share with you. So I'm talking about, obviously, the great, amazing Geraint Stanley Jones, John Hevins of this world. Now, these are all people who looked after me, and I say look after me, you know, they're not with us anymore. And but they were very giving, and I knew that they had things to say and knew more. 5 minutes, gee, no, it's not going to happen, Richie. Okay, no, it will do. And I've applied that to the staff. I've always attempted to employ staff who know more than me, and I try desperately not to be challenged by it. Because what's the point in you knowing or being an expert in that when you can actually have somebody who knows way more than you? So as I will speed, because I've said loads of things I was meaning to say. But the team, don't feel threatened by people in your team who know more than you. Celebrate it, you know, because they want to keep them. That might be difficult if they're really that good. The other thing, as the company grows, is learn to delegate. oh my God, that is really difficult. Because you were asked about what's the worst thing you've ever did. The worst thing I've ever did was I was invited, headhunted for the film agency, The Screen Job. So I left somebody in charge of my other company, and I thought it was a huge, huge accolade to them. Now this person happens to be my husband, my partner, and you know, cut a long story short, the company went bankrupt. So that did challenge a little bit our relationship, but 32 years later we're still together. But that was a disaster because that's an example of delegating to somebody who didn't want the responsibility. Very good middle ranking, but not somebody who could lead, you know. So delegating, hugely important, but I would qualify that by saying delegate when you are confident, you know, because you mentioned the guy who went to the client and you know, fucked it up basically.
Yeah. I'm sure saying one.
Yeah, and something else, by the way, when you are being filmed, if you say really bad words, they can't use it. So if you're going to prep it, you know, that's another way of getting out of stuff like that. I'm going to skip the next bit. I was going to talk generally about events and festivals. There are 4 pillars, but if you want to know what they are, I'll tell you at some other point. And I'll finish now on Iris, and I'll sort of pick up on all the little bits that I talked about. I do apologise for going all over the place. One of the things we did with Iris, which was very interesting, was we positioned, and this is a lot about Wales at the moment. At the moment, things are changing very, very quickly. But we positioned Iris from the very beginning as a British project. Over my dead body, would Iris be seen as a Welsh project? Can you imagine how difficult that was for me? But there was a reason for doing it. We wanted to make sure that Iris was a British project with international reach, which came from Wales. Now I actually think if we had more of that, we probably wouldn't have had devolution, because we would have had our seats, you know, around the table. That's very controversial. Well, it's not controversial, it's just an opinion. So we deliberately said Iris would have to be, and it's delivered for us. You know, Lord Glenderbrook, playing old Michael Bishop before he was ennobled, is one of our major funders. The 30,000 cash I mentioned, that's from the foundation, and there's money to run the festival. Lord Palumbo, Ministry of Sound. We're just about to announce in January, so that is confidential. What is this going on?
Take a while to edit.
Marvellous. But a 3-year deal where they are hosting 3 big events in London. Food, drink, venue, and all that that entails. You know, £30,000, which, you know, so it was really important. We knew that right at the very beginning. Shall I answer a question? But the other one, which is very controversial, is telling the truth. Oh, well, there's a difference between lying. Yeah? I'm going to go read this one up now. There's a difference between lying and talking something up, or avoiding things you don't need to talk about. Because I tell you one thing, partners, they can sniff a disaster. You can say, it's like when you go out to a club, or when I used to go out to clubbing when I was young, you could spot the person who's on their own at 2 o'clock in the morning. You know, you could just desperation. You come home with me, please, you know. And then earlier, so, and that is true about, we all know what that means, don't you? Yeah? And it's true about business, I think. You know, you can smell fear. You can smell somebody who has a week to find 20,000 to pay the staff wages, you know. It's quite sad. But there is, because, you know, because I tend to, my late father, he would always say I was too honest. And I always challenged him on that. And I think I've agreed to meet him halfway. I never got to tell him that, unfortunately, but I think it's a halfway. So I think people do appreciate. They really do appreciate. We got the contract to, the festivals company got the contract to recognise, I almost said it was celebrate, to recognise 10 years of devolution, which is 10 years ago. And I think the reason we got the contract was when we pitched, and we were against huge companies. And the festivals company, I think it was only, what, 2 years old. And we got the whole thing. It was the biggest contract we'd ever had. It was like £200,000 worth of contract, or slightly more than that. And we got it because we told the truth. And I remember my colleague at the time was absolutely angry with me. I didn't swear there. And he couldn't believe. And I remember telling them, we were in the final three, and I remember telling them, well, listen, people who couldn't get a flying fish. They really couldn't. But we need to wait, so how do we, so we basically, the idea really quickly, there was loads of stuff, but we basically said, let's find kids who are 10 years old on the 10th anniversary from all over Wales, invite them to a birthday party in the Senedd, in a space that they're not allowed to use, and get somebody from the Senedd to cut the cake. Servicing the children of the future. And we brought parents, and some of them hated devolution, but the cake was really tasty and they loved devolution. But anyway, that was, but it was being honest, and so I think it's a halfway house, and I'm well overrun. I'm overrunning so that Richie never asks me again to come and talk. There is method in the matters. Anyway, I've skipped over. I am so sorry, but have they got time for questions? Or have I? Oh, lovely.
Yes, you do. Thank you. Well.
Thank you. There'll be no questions. I'm too scared.
Questions?
I want to ask one, but I wasn't sorry. You go first.
What advice would you give to somebody who doesn't really want to delegate and control the project?
How big is your project likely to be?
Well, I mean, just if you like to be in control of everything.
Yeah,
You
you're going
like
to
to
be.
do things a certain way, but you might have to outsource resources.
Learn how to delegate. No, it is difficult, and for the first couple of years you might not need to. Well, you probably won't be able to afford to. Anyway, you'll be working the long hours, as I did, living on beans on toast. And the cheapest bread you could find, I don't even think it was bread. By the time it was toasted, this is an anyway, so learn. But the reality is you won't be able to afford to, unless you get, lots of money. And then if you do have to delegate, as I said, make sure the team and the people you're delegating to are the best you can afford.
You might have already spoke about this because I missed the first 2 minutes.
That was the best.
Oh,
The best bit.
Sorry.
Sorry. No.
But what was your main motivator to do this? Did you say that before I came in? Did you talk about what your main motivator to start this business was, or?
Okay, well, I say business.
Or to start?
Yeah, well, as in the last 5 years, all we've done is Iris. So I've mentioned my father. My father died about 6 years ago, and it was, as everybody tells you, it's the worst thing that happens. It's quite traumatic, and and I was invited to be on a jury in India, and I remember being 18, thinking middle-aged people go to India to find themselves, and then I was, Dad had died, and I was India, blah blah, and I came back and I told Grant, I'm going to get rid of everything. I'm just going to do Iris. Because if I don't do it now, it ain't going to happen. Which is go back to my first point about time. So I made everybody redundant, which was really horrible. They had good redundancies and off they went. So somebody took, we were doing corporate videos like they were out of fashion, making good money, winning contracts, everybody went off. And I stayed with Iris, and we're now a team of 5. And then when the fact, and then during the year we employ about 20, 25 people. Yeah, so yeah, what I did say at the beginning was my journey, I'm 53, so my journey's kind of been quite long and lots of bits, but I've ended up probably doing the one thing that I think, again, Dylan mentioned it really actually, something that I'm passionate about, wanted to do, and clearly not for money. Do you want to guess how much I earn or how much I take out of the company? No, I'm happy because it's in public.
10%?
Hmm?
10%?
No, do you want to know the figure? Have a guess.
40.
50 grand.
40, 50. Any other takers?
15.
23. So I'm not doing it for the money, trust me. But we've been together 30 years. The mortgage is tiny. So it is, all of those things, so the bit about making money, I always find that funny. Don't get me wrong, I'm not like, oh, I'm going to make a political party point here. I've got no problem in somebody being unbelievably wealthy and unbelievably successful and that wealth or profits carry on. But for me, it's always been about employing people, giving people opportunities, and if I can afford the bottle of Sancerre, it's fine. I was in London recently, and in this hotel, bottle of Sancerre, you won't believe it's white wine. It's about, you could buy it in the shops, it's quite expensive if it's a nice one, just under 20 quid. If you go to a restaurant in Cardiff, it's about 30 quid. £71! So suffice to say, if I was earning fucking £70,000, didn't buy that bottle of Sancerre. 71! Do you know how many pizzas you could get for £71? Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you.